Okay, so we'll start our second work session of the 6th of November. Transportation Improvement Program and Annual Construction Program.
Yeah, good morning, Council. For the record, Ken Lader, Public Works Director. With me this morning are Chris Carl, our Programming Manager in Transportation, and our Transportation Division Manager, Steve Gallup. And we'll be presenting on the TIP this morning. Chris is going to do the presentation. Steve and I will be available for questions. And with that, we'll kick it off.
Thank you, Ken. Good morning, Council and attending public. Before you today is a prequel to the 2030 Transportation Improvement Program, what I'll refer to as the TIP, and the 2025 Annual Construction Program, also the ACP. Next slide, please. The goal of the work session is to review our proposed 2025-2030 Transportation Improvement Program, as well as the 2025 Annual Construction Program, which is the first year of the TIP. Just to specify the funding sources that we will use in the year to come, and to adopt these programs in November in 2 weeks' time on the 19th, before budget adoption in December per state law. Next slide, please. A brief run through the agenda. We'll talk about some guiding principles and legalities. We'll go through the path that the TIP comes from the Capital Facility Plan underneath the Growth Management Act, a little bit about our evaluation system, some project areas and funding details, our sources of our funding, our proposed 6-year construction schedule of our TIP, some risks and unknowns, and where we are in the steps of the process. Next slide, please. Some guiding principles, how the program is set through the Council's guiding principles is debt service, secondarily safety and preservation of existing assets, and then when we get into the capital projects themselves. Some legalities, both revised codes of Washington and Washington Administrative Code. All capital road projects have to be in the ACP. Again, that's the first year of our TIP. County engineer develops and applies priority programming. We rank our different projects and programs, and that we have to adopt our program before budget adoption in December, and how the TIP follows the adopted policies and comprehensive plan via the capital facility plan, which we'll see in a couple slides from now. Next slide, please. Or here it is. So the path between the comprehensive plan underneath the Growth Management Act into the capital facility plan is where we take over within Public Works ourselves. From there, we both rank our larger capital projects as well as our individual program projects to come up with a 6-year transportation improvement program. The annual construction program is the first year of the TIP, again, to specify the different funding sources and the approximate budgets that we're anticipating in the year to come. And from there, underneath the ACP, we develop the individual projects, assigning capital road project numbers or CRPs for the individual projects themselves. Next slide, please. A brief run through a little bit about the criteria that we use to evaluate our larger capital projects, largely rooted in safety. About a third of the program is under safety. We also consider economic development and mobility, but there are other factors involved, whether or not we have the ability to fund a project. For example, bridges have a little bit of a different path than our larger capital projects would, with specific funding for them, as well as sidewalks, infills, and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. Here's a brief overview of the entirety of our 6-year program, approximately $243 million, and our different sources of funding. I'll briefly run through those. $62 million for grants, $42.8 for traffic impact fees, $39.6 million for real estate excise tax, $88 million for county road fund, $4.4 million for partnerships and county arterial preservation through CRAB, and $6.9 million in utility reimbursables. The utility reimbursables previously was not in our TIP budgets. This is the second year in a row that we will add those for full disclosure. But those are dollars in, dollars out with mostly utility partnerships. Out of that, I'm sorry, can you just go back one second? I wanted to clarify that out of that $62 million in grants, 35.7 are secured grants with about 26.3 million that we are projecting through the 6-year program. Next 3 slides will represent our proposed construction schedules within these 6 years. The first section being our larger 179th Street projects. We have one at 29th Avenue, a roundabout going in there that will begin in the year coming, with the majority of the rest of our projects starting in 2028 into 2029 and possibly into 2030 for finish. Some other larger projects, we're just finishing our beautiful 99th Street extension between 94th Avenue and SR 503. And projects to come, 152nd Avenue between Padden and 99th, as well as the beginning of our 72nd Avenue corridor. Next slide, please. These are the schedules for our bridge and culvert program, various projects there. We're finishing up 2, 3 more to follow, as well as a culvert project, some road preservation projects, Sunset Falls Road, we're going to do a chip seal, Northwest 78th Street and St. John's, there's going to be surfacing projects with some sidewalk ramp and infill, as well as a rural Southeast Blair Road to complete the previous Northeast Blair Road extension all the way to Washougal River Road. And one project under the rural, though there's other projects throughout the program in the rural areas, 182nd Avenue and Risto Road will be getting a roundabout to alleviate some of that traffic concern there. Next slide, please. Projects under our sidewalk and ADA project. What's not listed here is our preservation ADA ramp work, but we have a couple of school projects as well as some extended projects on our previous commitments to Highway 99 and 68th Street, which is a partnership with the City of Vancouver between Highway 99 and St. John's Road. And then to finish it out, 2 projects under our Transportation Safety Improvement Program. A roundabout just recently completed at 119th, 152nd Avenue, and a future roundabout at Ward Road and Davis Road. Next slide, please. Some risks and unknowns is the possibility of additional grants typically awarded in late this year or early next year. We should be expecting some more grants before the year end and the possibility of some school and pedestrian bike projects as well. Also, the program relies upon project delivery of those projects that we have grant money as they come with expected deadlines of delivery. Thirdly is the volatility of our TIF, our traffic impact fees. They're largely estimated, but they're all driven by the market and what goes in developments. And then we reassess our TIP revenues and expenditures throughout the year. Projects go up or down, or if we get funding, that'll alleviate some of that county funding sources. Next slide, please. Where we are with the steps, we're here on November 6th with the work session. Previous to this, we had a Planning Commission work session on October 3rd, as well as the Planning Commission hearing on October 17th, where it was recommended 4-0 through the Planning Commission, and thanks to them. Tomorrow we will be presenting to the Development Engineering Advisory Board, or DEEB, and they will be coming back just short of 2 weeks' time on the 19th, hopefully for the adoption of the program. Again, that's going to be before we adopt the budget in December. So I'll close with that, and I'll ask for any questions.
Questions by council?
Chair.
Please go ahead, Glenn.
Thank you. I have a few questions. The first one I would like to ask just generalization. I'm wanting to know with the current funding level that we have, are our roads being maintained? Are they deteriorating? Are we not able to keep up with the deterioration of them? Are they improving? What is the status of that level of service that we're providing?
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you, Counselor Young. I think I can answer that. So we continue with our regular operations and maintenance. So that's a little bit separate from our capital funding for building new infrastructure, of course, and the funding sources are a little bit different. But I would say our level of service is as good as we can get right now. We do recognize that we have trouble keeping up on the maintenance side, but we do have a preservation program that analyzes the roads regularly on cycle, where we try to get out ahead of the an index on the pavement where we see that it's starting to come apart. We want to get ahead of that so we don't have to completely rebuild a road. But I would say, our level of service isn't suffering, but we always have things to address, and we get quite a few communications from our constituents about areas where they're concerned. And I believe we've been fairly responsive to those concerns. So I don't know if that's specific enough for you, but that's essentially where we're at. So.
Okay, so I guess and this is kind of a question. There's no real metric to be able to answer this, but just give me your thoughts on it. I mean, are we maintaining our roads to a level of service that our community needs, I guess, or desires?
So I believe the answer is yes, and we occasionally have challenges. We had a contract a few years back where the pavement preservation work that we did, some of it unraveled rather rapidly during one of the ice events. So we actually did a forensic investigation independently to try to determine why that was, with a separate geotech. I'm not sure what the results are for that, but we will always have challenges, but I believe we're doing the best we can, and I think we're keeping up with things pretty well from my understanding. So.
Okay, great. I thank you for that answer. It was kind of a little bit off topic here because we're talking capital, but I'm always wanting to check in on that whenever we're discussing roads. So my next question is kind of in line with that in terms of funding. And I appreciate seeing this. I've been very outspoken against impact fees because of its impact on affordable housing. But what I do appreciate seeing in this chart is we are assessing impact fees and according to state law. And I appreciate that. It's actually less. There's supposed to be a balance, which you say is somewhere around 50%. I think we're closer to 25, 30% or so. What my question is how long has it been since we have looked at traffic impact fees and whether they should be updated?
So I think that's a timely question also. Chris might be able to speak a little bit more to that, but I will say it's been a couple of years since we adjusted the rates for TIF and the credits. That's really based on the construction cost index. It's kind of a, for the developers, that's kind of almost a net zero in terms of how those credits are gained or how they're applied. But I'm going to let Chris speak to that a little bit. It is an ongoing discussion. We have some work there to do with the planners in Oliver's group that will be coming up next year.
Yeah, not much to add there. As Ken said at the end, with Oliver's group and planning, they're currently starting to look into any sort of update that's needed. We're also pursuing a consultant to rescore some of the principles that we use for our capital facility plan and into the TIP, with namely House Bill 1181, for example, and some of the different scoring that we'll need for that. But yeah, traffic impact fees are typically looked at periodically for updates, and
Okay,
we'll soon
great.
have one.
Thank you. And then one last question. Well, it's kind of two questions, but the ADA projects that are listed in there, are those projects that go along with another project that just have to be done or triggered by that project, or are they actually dedicated for ADA projects alone?
Yeah. Also, another good question, Councilor Young. So most of our ADA work is triggered by an adjustment to existing pavement. So preservation work that we would do if we're going through and doing an HMA or asphalt overlay, then if any ramps that are adjacent to that need to be brought up to ADA compliance if they are not already compliant. So that drives a major portion of our ADA program. We did have kind of a separate program where we worked with the community on ramps that were of particular challenge or interest, where we shifted some and deferred some of those dollars to really address things that would be a priority in the community. But I think we've worked through most of that list and probably need to refresh it now and see what else is left to be done. But most of that is triggered by project work. Anything to add, Steve?
Yeah, also we have the development projects. Those also kind of trigger ADA improvements. So whenever there's a development adjacent to existing intersection or road or something like that, that would also trigger ADA improvements too. So.
Okay, so just a couple comments on that. One is that I would like to see a little more focus on elective projects, ADA projects that we look and we see there's a significant problem here. We're not doing a road reconstruction here that triggers it or anything like that, but we see there's a significant problem and we go and we try to make it better. And then, I don't know if maybe you did, but if you haven't, I certainly encourage you to work with the newly created Accessibility Commission and, involve them in that decision-making process on how we prioritize ADA projects, how, where we allocate those funds. I think that they'll be an invaluable resource to direct that portion of the capital plan.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor. I appreciate those comments. And you may not be aware, but Lily Longshore actually worked with us in that capacity as a county employee prior to COVID. And that's how we led to some of those specific projects that weren't necessarily due to pavement adjustments. So I appreciate the comment, and that is something that we'll be looking at and hopefully working with the committee on. So
great, thank you. Those are all my comments.
Other questions from council?
Yes, thank you. I have fewer questions thanks to Councillor Young. And I was wondering, just looking at the chart on page 5 about the comp plan and the Growth Management Act driving things, since we're in the process and it's, as I've observed things, it seems like infrastructure those considerations comes toward the end of the comp plan update. So I was just wondering as we're in the process, is there some collaboration that you're able to do with community planning? Because I think there's some efficiencies that that information could be provided in terms of where we're growing.
yeah, thank you, Councilor Marshall. I'll take a stab at this, and Steve can fill in if I don't quite get the detail. But we absolutely coordinate with Oliver's group, and in fact, Public Works has 1.5 FTEs that we pay for within the planning department that are devoted to transportation elements. So they work with our consultants to really come up with those regional needs that would feed the CFP updates, as well as work directly with us on our concerns for things like on the 179th corridor and our upcoming projects on 72nd. So yes, and it's important. So yeah.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Related to 179th, the WashDOT project, I call it that 4.9, is that all state funding that's identified? That'll be done in 2028, 2030?
Are you talking about that specific project?
Yes, that specific project.
Yeah, that's just the naming nomenclature for the identity of where it is. So it'll be adjacent to the I-5 179th Street exit, but it's just that little segment that's going to be on the east side of I-5.
Okay, and that's our funding that will
Correct,
go for
yes.
that, but it's not the whole interchange.
No,
work.
that
Okay.
WashDOT's going to actually do an extensive, project there. We'll be
I
in
know.
correlation with that.
Yep, great. Thanks for that. And let's see, I'm not sure, I don't think I have any, the bridges. Are any of the railroad bridges included in that number, or is that a separate?
That's
Thing.
separate, yeah.
Okay, great, thanks.
Karen, any questions?
Just a comment. I don't see anything in here on the third corridor, and I remain concerned about that because of how we will build over what would be the logical connections within our cities and the county to a third corridor and a bridge that would be a third bridge going over the Columbia. So why is that still not included?
Yeah, thank you, Counselor Bowerman. I do appreciate the question and continue to hear the concern from council. So the most basic and direct answer is we don't have that direct connection in our jurisdiction to have control over or plan for that third corridor. So we can continue to speak with our partners about it, but the county, at least as far as the county road fund and our jurisdiction with county roads, we will not be the lead on that because we don't have the physical geographic connection to that crossing.
I hear you and appreciate what you're saying, but in working with the different organizations that are connected, particularly with the IBR, there's this kind of action going on, pointing to a different agency or a different agency that maybe would have authority to put it in. And it seems so much of it to come down to, well, it's not in your tip. So why would we be able to go forward with that? And I hear that so much. And I understand that we don't have the immediate jurisdiction over the third corridor per se, but we do over the connectivity to it. And as we continue to build over the area where connectivity might be, I think we're losing more and more for the ability to have it be a smooth process that doesn't call for some destruction of things that are being built right now.
Yeah, so I do appreciate that concern. I will say most of our roadway grid for our large arterials or collectors or our principal arterials are kind of based on the township range, going way back to where we carved up our roadways for networks. So I'm not concerned personally that we would develop over those larger connections like that we would probably use for the connection. But I do hear the concern that there's not enough planning or coordination for how those connections would happen. And I will continue to hear the concern and have the conversations where we can. That ultimately those changes for us to apply dollars with our tip would need to exist at the capital facilities plan level. And would have to be part of the planning to feed into the program, just like this slide shows here. So.
Does that conclude your questions or comments, Karen?
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and I had some things I wanted to talk about, but I want to touch on some of the things that were just talked about. First, Glenn, I would implore you to go back and look at some of the council work we did over the 179th when we talked about the TIFs, when we talked about all of our development agreements, where we got creative on allocating costs for developers on getting our infrastructure put in place to have concurrency. Tremendous amount of work by the county at that point. And to your point, the takeaway is this: we have some of the highest fees in the state, period. So go back and look. And so you're not approaching this from a vacuum and as if this is a new topic. Go back and look at some of that discussion, especially in 2019, 2020. A lot of discussion on our fees and what they should be and how high they were. As to Karen's point, I'm just going to be more blunt. This is an absolute failure of leadership at all levels that we haven't planned on an additional corridor and a bypass, a ring road. From my point of view, there's nothing we can do about Oregon. And from your point of view, how do you plan arterials? How do you plan a map north of the river when you don't know what's going to happen south of the river? So it's a failure of leadership. And I point the finger mainly at our federal transportation authority. We have a strategic corridor. I believe in strategic things. And from Mexico to Canada, we have a lift bridge and an oversaturated corridor. We need other bridges. We need other tunnels. We need other ways to move commerce east and west and north and south, south and north and west to east. And that's a failure. The federal government got out of the business of leading regional projects decades ago. I don't know why, but this is a lingering one between the commerce on the river, our ports, our airports, and then I-5. It's oversaturated. It's a plug. And at some point, the federal government needs to step forward and say, I'm going to be the adult in the room. We need to plan this. And there has been some planning on the south, on the Oregon side, from Hillsborough north. I mean, you can look, go Google it. You'll see the old maps or the maps where someone had a planned route. And the reality is, where you say we're not going to pave over everything, we already have. Every day that goes by where we don't plan what we need today in the way of additional corridors just becomes harder and harder with the expansion of natural areas, with the expansion of development, commercial buildings. I mean, even this IBR that's planned is going to tear down brand new buildings if it goes as planned. And so what do? I mean, we can't just expend time, full-time staffing on this, and this came up years ago. We'll give us the money and we'll plan on a different corridor. But the reality is, we give you the money, you hire a consultant, you come up with a notional right of way that we need to preserve and start buying up, and it won't match at all with anything the federal government or Oregon wants to do, and it would be just a complete waste of time and energy. It is a failure of leadership at the national level, I think. So leaving all that, so I have beat this drum and I'm going to beat it again. And I'm really focusing on my district. And I know there are locations throughout the county that are just the same. I would call them hotspots. So we have East Vancouver is building like crazy. Focusing around the 192nd, First, building like crazy. We have residential developments in the county, just north of there, adjacent. And then you have Camas with their North Shore development. They're putting in more commercial. They just put in huge warehouse by Lacamas Prairie. There's just such a confluence of building and construction, and I see a complete disconnect on keeping the roads up. And we're having that discussion right now with the residential development. Where's that connectivity going to be? I mean, you already have the neighbor saying, we don't want it through our neighborhood. You've got a stoplight on 13th right there. You have access from either way. But the point of this discussion that I've brought it up before, because I've been told, yeah, we're talking to the other public works. We're talking to the other road projects. I don't see anything on the tip that's going to accommodate the North Shore development, that's going to accommodate East Vancouver development with Hewlett Packard, the First Street development, all that commercial that's going in on 192nd. I don't see anything that's going to accommodate what's being built today. So are you guys sitting, do you have a regular meeting? Do you sit down with the planners from the cities? In this case, in my district, Camas and Vancouver, do you sit down and go, what are we going to do about this? I mean, you've got 192nd. That could have been an additional corridor if someone really thought ahead, crossing over to 84 and a good geographic area to put a bridge. Nevertheless, we go from 4 pretty well developed 2 standard lanes down to county 1 lane north and south at Harmony. I mean, it's just like, okay, I'm sorry, this doesn't work. It's not working today. People can't get in and out of their driveways. When they have a soccer tournament there, no one can get by. No one can get in and out of Harmony. I mean, we are not keeping up. So what is the collaboration that's occurring to coordinate these 6-year tips in hotspots like I've just described?
So thank you, Chair, for the question. So the collaboration I would describe as not regular meetings, but periodic meetings. For instance, we just met with the Transportation Division Manager and Public Works Director for the city a couple of weeks ago to discuss possible extension of 18th to tie it down into just north of the area that you're talking about on 13th. Past the Schnell development that's going on right now. So that's just an example, but I think we can do more to coordinate with the different agencies. The challenge with seeing the effect of that on a 6-year plan like this for the TIP is that that's long-range planning that needs to be built into the CFP. That's where the planners in Oliver's group are going to come in, work with the cities with their plans. And I can't speak to how often they're meeting right now, but I know those communications are going on. And then you would see it come into our 6-year tip because it's part of the CFP. So we can do better is what I'm saying.
So I
Yeah.
encourage you to do that. And I didn't mean to leave Wastad out of that conversation
Yeah.
with the Camas Loop Bridge and what they've done on 500. And
Yeah.
I just want to highlight one other point, and then I'll move off of it because we need to do better. So the development from the river to Fern Prairie Market is phenomenal. Wastat, a couple of years ago, repaved 500. Northeast 28th, out towards Ingle Road, that area where Camas kind of comes around and has been putting in hundreds of homes. Beautiful. If you're a bicyclist, you would have loved it. If you're a motorcyclist, you loved it. And then in the last 3 years ago now, I'm kind of losing track of time. I think that road's been dug up like 4 times. I mean, it was paved, it was beautiful, and it was within like 6 months, it was dug up by somebody else. I mean, I've never seen a road ripped up so many times within a couple miles space over and over again. Right now, it's all ripped up. All that good pavement's gone. For utilities, for sidewalks, for increasing roads. And so that to me is a failure between Wastat, Clark County, and Camas. I don't think Vancouver played a role in that, but we need to fix that. I mean, it's got to be a waste of money to newly pave a road and then tear it completely up multiple times over continuing years. I don't know how we improve that, but we need something like a lake management symposium with the road planners to focus on these hotspots, saying, how do we stop this redundant tearing up of the road? How do we do it once? And how do we work together?
So, of course, I can only speak to our own practice, but you do point out. So we typically have a 5-year moratorium on new corridors like that or improvements. So an example would be all the pavement work that we did up Highway 99 a couple of years ago, where we won't let anybody cut into it for that time period. But I can't speak to the coordination between the state and development, but you bring up a good point. I think there probably is a real disconnect there with how they would be able to work with the local jurisdiction on development and protecting that new infrastructure. So It's a question that I can pose to see if they have a similar program and why it's not being met. So.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments by Councilor Marshall?
Yes, I just want to follow up on some of the comments that you've made. Something that I've observed, but I think is a structural problem, is that development itself needs to come into the conversation. Because as I understand how roads get funded, it's the development is allowed to move forward on its own before all of the infrastructure is in place, because it's a pay as you go. And I've seen it out on 179th when one of the first projects was like in the far flung corner of that urban holding that was lifted. So I don't know how to fix that, but I think there's some infrastructure that needs to be in place and coordinated with the development that is going to be occurring. So it's when you get the money and what you can do. So if you could fix that, that'd be great.
Well, I was going to say Councilor Marshall is going to fix that next year, but it's a
I'm
real
on it.
issue, and you can see it around the country where you will see roads and development in place before a single house gets built. We just do things differently here, and someone needs to revisit how we do it, because we're always playing catch up, and when you're putting houses in and then tearing up the roads, I mean, it
And
makes sense.
if I could, just a quick comment on that, Chair and Councilor Marshall. I mean, that is one mechanism as to why we had the urban holding in place, to prevent this sort of situation. And by lifting it, we sort of put ourselves in that situation to be going concurrently, which I will say as the county engineer isn't ideal for, our constituents or the road safety. But it is a model that will get you there in the end, but it can be pretty painful to do that. And I would contrast that with what we typically do. And what we did on 119th was put that infrastructure in before a lot of the buildings and development went up. So that is our typical model within the urban growth area. And we continue to try to do that. That's why we have 72nd corridor coming up, as our next look for a major corridor, hopefully prior to the development that would come, based on the regional traffic models that we have. So anyway, just a comment, we want it to work for our constituents as well. So.
Super. Yes, go ahead, Glenn.
Couple things generated by some of your comments. I appreciate your thoughts on the fees. And if staff could direct me to those meetings where those conversations took place regarding the impact fees and all that, I would really appreciate it. I'd like to look into that. And then as far as the roads, do we not have, like when we pave a road, do we not have a moratorium on cutting into that road? And do we not have like charges for people when they do cut into the road? That's like, I think the city of Vancouver has like a 5-year moratorium where you can cut into it, but if you do, you pay like road rehabilitation fees, or I can't remember what it's called. Do we have anything like that?
So thank you, Councilor Young. And I was just speaking to that as far as it does depend a little bit on the improvement and the type of preservation. Like a chip seal wouldn't have the same level of moratorium, I don't believe. But when we're doing our HMA work and full asphalt overlays, we do have the same type of moratorium. As far as a fee, though, for the utilities coming in, I don't believe we assess any fee, but once they are cutting into the road, we have some pretty strict requirements as far as if they're how they have to restore it. So if they're affecting a full travel lane, they really have to pave that full lane. They can't just, cut out a 3-foot strip and run down the road and then not pave the whole thing, because we recognize that's going to affect how traffic can run on the road. So I hope that answers your question. But.
Okay, yeah, it does.
And Chris might have a little bit more to add to that. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that our larger projects do coordinate with the utilities. That's why the one number I referenced in the funding, 179th Street for sure, that area will coordinate with utilities where they have to either move or add service. So that's all part of that planning of those larger projects.
Okay, road restoration fee, I think that's what they call it. Thank you. And then my last comment is, Gary, talking about a third corridor. I also believe that we need a third corridor here. There's no question about it. If nothing else, simply redundancy in case of emergency. But, where do we start? I think that's a good question, but I think we have to be realistic about it. And there are so many partners that will have to be in agreement on doing that, including Portland across the river. So quite frankly, I look at how the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project got started. Senator Cleveland started reaching out to her counterparts. I think that's what we need to do. We need to start talking to the cities ourselves. That would be including Portland. They're going to have to be on board with that. So if it's something that we really want to accomplish, I think that we're going to have to start communicating with our counterparts in other jurisdictions.
Thank you. I think we have done that by resolution, at least with 3 counselors over the last couple of years, as best we can. So any last comments before we conclude this work session? Thank you. Hard work you're doing, a lot of money. And there are certain aspects I think we can do better. So let's keep working on that.
Yeah, thank you, Council.
Okay, well, that concludes this work session then. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Council.
We still have a third one, and they've been in the audience.